My name is Raymond. I am 66 years old, and for 40 years I was the invisible man who cleaned up Chicago's mess. As a retired sanitation worker, I know exactly what trash looks like, even when it is wearing a designer suit. I never told my son what I really kept in storage locker 404. When he married a woman who looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe, I made sure she would never find the key. But while I was fishing in Halifax, my son called me in a panic. "Dad, she found it. She has bolt cutters. She is going to break the lock." I had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. I just took a sip of my coffee and whispered, "Let them cut it, son." Because what was behind that door was not money. It was a prison sentence. Before I tell you what they found, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. The morning air in Halifax was crisp enough to wake the dead. I sat on the edge of the small fishing boat, watching the line bob in the gray Atlantic water. It was the kind of silence you cannot buy, the kind I had to earn by waking up at 3 in the morning every day for 4 decades. Back in Chicago, my hands were always stained with grease and the smell of the city's waste. People would cross the street to avoid walking near the garbage truck. They would hold their breath when I passed by. But out here, with the cold wind biting my face, I finally felt clean. I had built a good life from other people's refuse. I saved every penny while my coworkers bought new trucks and flashy clothes. I thought I had left the filth behind me in Chicago, but I was wrong. The real garbage does not get picked up on Tuesdays. Sometimes it marries your son and invites her lover to dinner at your table. I closed my eyes, listening to the water lap against the hull, savoring this one moment of peace before the storm I knew was coming. The vibration of my phone against the tackle box shattered the silence. It was my son, Andre. I knew that ringtone. I knew it meant trouble before I even swiped the screen. When I answered, all I could hear was heavy breathing and the sickening crunch of metal grinding against metal. It sounded like a car wreck in slow motion. Andre was screaming, his voice cracking like he was a little boy again. "Dad, you need to call the police. Keisha and that guy Kyle, they are at the storage facility. They are at Unit 404. They know you are out of the country. Kyle has a pair of bolt cutters the size of his arm." I tried to stop them, Dad, but Kyle shoved me into the wall. "He is cutting the lock right now." I could hear the desperation in his voice, the sound of a man watching his world fall apart. In the background, I heard a woman's voice, shrill and demanding. That was Keisha. She was yelling at Kyle to hurry up before security came around. She was screaming about the inheritance she deserved, about the millions I must have hoarded away like a miser. Any other father would have been terrified. Any other father would have called the cops immediately or told his son to run. But I just sat there looking at the calm water. My heart rate did not even speed up. A slow, cold smile spread across my face, a smile that would have scared Andre if he could have seen it. They thought they were breaking into a treasure chest. They thought they were about to find dirty bags of cash from the old garbage man. But I knew exactly what was waiting for them in the dark of locker 404. It was not retirement money. It was a trap I had set the day she walked down the aisle. For 40 years, I was the man who made the city disappear. While the rest of Chicago slept, I was out there in the freezing rain and the humid summer heat, hauling bags that leaked God knows what onto my uniform. People look at a garbage man and they see failure. They see a man who had no other options. They roll up their windows when the truck pulls up next to them at a red light. I saw the way mothers would pull their children closer when I walked into a diner for a coffee, as if the smell of the landfill was contagious. But they did not know what I knew. They did not know that the trash is where the truth lives. You learn a lot about people by what they throw away. And you learn that Americans are wasteful. They throw away televisions that just need a $5 fuse. They toss out copper wire and aluminum that is worth more than their hourly wage. I was not just hauling trash. I was prospecting. Every afternoon after my shift, I would strip the copper, repair the electronics, and clean up the discarded treasures. I lived like a monk. I drove a 10-year-old sedan and wore clothes until they fell apart. Every extra dollar went into two things. The first was Andre's education. My wife, Sarah, God rest her soul, made me promise her one thing before the cancer took her. She grabbed my hand, her grip so weak I could barely feel it, and whispered, "Do not let them look down on our boy Ray. Make him someone." So I did. I worked double shifts. I ate bologna sandwiches so Andre could eat steak. I paid for his pharmacy school in cash so he would not start his life with the heavy chains of student debt. The second place my money went was storage locker 404. For 20 years, that 10 by 10 metal box was my sanctuary. Every Sunday, rain or shine, I would drive down to the You Store It facility on the south side. I would spend exactly 2 hours inside with the door rolled down. The neighbors whispered. My friends at the barbershop joked that I must have a second family or a collection of stolen goods. I never corrected them. Silence is a weapon, and I learned early on that the less people know about your business, the less they can ruin it. That locker was the only place in the world where I was not just a garbage man. It was where I kept the things that defined who I really was. Things that did not fit into the small, cramped apartment I lived in to save money. Then came Keisha. Andre met her at a club downtown, and within 6 months, my boy was lost. Keisha was beautiful, I will give her that. She had a smile that could light up a room and eyes that could calculate the cost of your watch from across the street. She claimed she was an influencer, which as far as I could tell meant she took pictures of her food and complained about service workers online. When Andre told me he wanted to marry her, I saw the hesitation in his eyes. He knew. Deep down, he knew she was out of his league, or at least out of his tax bracket. But he was in love, or maybe just lust, and he wanted to give her the world. The wedding cost $40,000. That was my entire retirement savings, the money I had put aside for a boat to finally sail north. But Andre looked at me with those pleading eyes, and I wrote the check. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted to believe that maybe I was just a cynical old man judging a book by its cover. But the cover was expensive, and the pages were empty. At the reception, Keisha did not even dance with me. She spent the entire night taking selfies with her friends, holding a glass of champagne that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. The real nightmare started after the honeymoon. I went over to their new house, a place I helped them put the down payment on, to see my new grandson, little Marcus. I had washed my hands 3 times. I had put on my best Sunday suit and splashed on the expensive cologne Sarah used to like. I reached out to hold that baby, my heart swelling with the kind of love only a grandfather knows. Keisha stepped in front of me like a security guard. She wrinkled her nose, sniffing the air theatrically. "You cannot hold him, Raymond," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You smell like the street. Babies have sensitive immune systems. We cannot have him catching something from your clothes." I stood there, my arms empty, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I had scrubbed my skin raw. I was cleaner than she was, but to her I would always be the trash man. Andre just looked at the floor, too afraid of her temper to defend his own father. That was the moment I knew. She did not love him. She loved the stability he provided, the pharmacist's salary, the house. And she hated me because I was a reminder of where that money came from. Then Kyle showed up. Keisha introduced him as her brother-in-law, the husband of her sister, who lived in Atlanta. But the sister never visited. Only Kyle. He was a tall white man with slicked back hair and a suit that looked expensive until you got close enough to see the fraying cuffs. He claimed to be in real estate, but he spent most of his time sitting on Andre's couch drinking Andre's liquor and talking about big deals that were just around the corner. He looked at me with a smirk that made my fists itch. He would ask me questions like, "So Ray find any good half-eaten burgers in the trash today?" and then laugh like it was the funniest joke in the world. He was constantly pitching schemes to Andre. Cryptocurrency house flipping offshore investments. He was a shark circling a seal. One afternoon during a barbecue where I was relegated to manning the grill while they sat in the shade, I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water. The window was open, and they were sitting on the patio unaware I was just inside. I heard Kyle's voice, low and conspiratorial. "You know the old man has money, Keisha. These blue-collar types, they do not trust banks. They stuff cash in mattresses or bury it in the yard." Keisha laughed, the sound sharp like breaking glass. "He does not have a yard, Kyle. He lives in that shoebox apartment." Then Kyle said something that made my blood freeze. "What about that storage locker Andre said he goes there every Sunday? Never misses a week. He has been renting it for 20 years. That is where the gold is, Keisha. Cash, jewelry, maybe bonds. He is hoarding it while you guys struggle to pay the mortgage. We need to get into that locker before the old man kicks the bucket and the state takes it all." I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. They were not just ungrateful. They were predators. They were planning to rob me while eating the food I paid for. I looked out the window at Kyle leaning back in my son's chair, planning how to spend my life's work. And in that moment, the sadness in my heart turned into something cold and hard. If they wanted to know what was in locker 404, I would show them. But they were not going to like what they found. Things began to unravel 2 months later, when my body finally decided to remind me that I was mortal. I was in my kitchen making coffee when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The cup shattered on the floor, and I felt a numbness spread down my left arm like cold water. It was a mild stroke, the doctors said. I would recover, but I needed rest and care. But as I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the sterile white ceiling, I realized that my vulnerability was not a tragedy to my family. It was an opportunity. Keisha and Kyle were standing in the hallway. They thought I was asleep, sedated by the medication, but my hearing was the one thing the stroke had not touched. The door was cracked open just an inch enough for their voices to drift in like poisonous smoke. "We cannot take care of him at the house," Keisha whispered, her voice sharp and impatient. "He is going to be a burden." "I am not changing diapers, Kyle. I am not doing it." Kyle's voice was lower, smoother, the voice of a man closing a deal. "There is that state facility on the west side," he said. "The one near the highway. It is cheap. If we move him there, we can get power of attorney. We can sell his apartment. The market is hot right now, Keisha. We could get 200 grand fast." My heart hammered against my ribs. They were talking about putting me in a place known for bed sores and neglect a place where old people went to rot just so they could liquidate my few assets. I waited for Andre to speak. I waited for my son to tell them that I was his father, that I had wiped his tears and paid for his future. But all I heard was a soft, defeated mumble. "But he is my dad, Keisha. Maybe we can." Keisha cut him off instantly. "Shut up, Andre. Unless you want to pay for a private nurse with money we do not have, he goes to the facility." Later that night, Andre came into my room alone. He looked 10 years older. He checked the door to make sure Keisha was not watching. Then he slipped a bottle of high-quality blood pressure medication into my hand. "I bought these with my own cash, Dad," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "Do not let her see them." She controls the accounts now. She says we are broke. He squeezed my hand and left. I lay there in the dark, clutching that plastic bottle. My son was a good man, but he was a broken man. He was drowning, and if I did not do something drastic, these two vultures would pick my bones clean and then move on to his. That night, the fear in my heart turned into cold, hard resolve. I was not going to die in a state home, and I was not going to let them win. When I was discharged a week later, I put my plan into motion. The first step was to make them believe I was losing my mind. I started shuffling when I walked. I would stare blankly at the wall when they spoke to me. I deliberately called Keisha by her mother's name, which I knew she hated. I played the part of the confused, senile old man perfectly. It made them careless. They stopped whispering. They started talking about the storage locker openly in front of me, assuming my brain was too mushy to understand. One evening, I sat in the living room while Keisha was scrolling through her phone and Kyle was drinking a beer. I pulled out a small, battered black notebook from my pocket. I had bought it at a dollar store specifically for this performance. I opened it and pretended to write muttering numbers under my breath. 50,000 in October. Yes, that makes 850 total. Safe. It is safe. I said it loud enough for them to hear, but quiet enough to seem like a secret. I saw Keisha's head snap up. Her eyes locked onto that notebook like a hawk spotting a field mouse. I pretended to notice them watching and quickly hid the book inside my jacket, looking guilty and terrified. I stood up shakily. "I need to go to the bathroom," I stammered and shuffled away. As I rounded the corner, I paused. I heard the explosion of whispers. "Did you hear that Kyle 850,000? He has almost $1 million in that locker." We were right. Kyle sounded like he was hyperventilating. "We have to get that key, Keisha. We have to get it now before he forgets where it is or loses it." The next morning, I dropped the final piece of bait. I walked into the kitchen where Andre was making coffee and announced that I was going to Halifax. "I have an old friend there," I said, keeping my voice trembling, but stubborn. "We are going to fish. I need the ocean air. I booked the ticket. I leave tomorrow for a week." Keisha tried to hide her excitement. "Oh, Dad, are you sure you are well enough?" she asked, her eyes gleaming. But I knew what she was thinking. A week. They had a whole week where the house would be empty and I would be thousands of miles away. It was the window of opportunity they had been praying for. I saw Kyle text someone under the table. The trap was set. The night before my flight, I drove to the storage facility for one last visit. It was raining, a cold, miserable Chicago rain that soaked into your bones. I parked my truck around the back so no one would see me. I unlocked Unit 404 and rolled up the door. Inside, it smelled of dust and old electronics, the smell of my life's work. It was not filled with gold bars or stacks of cash. It was filled with what looked like junk to the untrained eye. Stacks of old computer monitors, boxes of tangled cables, broken VCRs from the 90s. But I was not just a garbage man. I was a fixer. I knew how things worked. I spent the next 2 hours rigging the place. I took 4 high-definition micro cameras I had salvaged from a discarded security system at a bank renovation. I wired them into the corners of the unit, hidden behind stacks of old newspapers and inside the shell of a broken television. I connected them to a high-speed mobile hotspot I had bought with cash. I hooked everything up to a heavy-duty marine battery that could run for days without external power. I tested the feed on my phone. The image was crystal clear. Night vision. Motion sensors. Audio. I could see every speck of dust in the room. I could hear a pin drop. Then I prepared the centerpiece. I cleared a small space in the absolute center of the chaotic room. I placed a small, wobbly card table there. On top of the table, I placed two items. The first was a laptop, plugged into the battery set to turn on remotely. The second was a thick, red envelope. I stared at that envelope for a long time. It contained the truth that would destroy my son's marriage, but it would save his life. I felt a heavy sadness settle in my chest. A father should never have to do this to his family, but they had forced my hand. I walked out of the unit, pulling the door down with a metallic rattle. I clicked the padlock shut. It was a sturdy lock, but I knew Kyle would bring tools. I wanted them to break in. I needed them to break in. I got back into my truck and wiped the rain from my face. I was ready to go to Halifax. I was ready to go fishing. And I was ready to watch them hang themselves with the rope I had just braided for them. The flight was in 6 hours. I drove away, leaving the silent, watching eyes of the cameras waiting in the dark. Back in the hotel room in Halifax, I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat down in the armchair by the window. Outside, the ocean was dark and restless, but inside, the glow of my iPad illuminated the room with a ghostly blue light. I tapped the screen and brought up the feed from camera 1. It was like watching a reality show, except the stakes were my life savings and my son's future. The connection was perfect. I could see the sweat beading on Kyle's forehead as he strained against the bolt cutters. He was grunting, his face turning red, veins popping in his neck. He looked less like a businessman and more like a desperate junkie trying to score. Keisha was standing right next to him, holding a heavy tactical flashlight. The beam danced around the metal door, but mostly it stayed focused on the lock. She was not helping him physically. Instead, she was hissing insults at him. "Faster, Kyle. My God, you are useless. Put your back into it. If security comes around the corner, we are done." Her voice was thin and sharp, grating on my nerves even through the speakers. Then I saw Andre. My heart broke a little. He was standing near the edge of the frame, wringing his hands. He looked terrified. He took a step forward, his voice trembling as the microphone picked it up clearly. "Please, Keisha, we can still leave. This is wrong. It is breaking and entering. Dad is going to find out. Let's just go home." Keisha spun around so fast the flashlight beam blurred. She did not just yell at him, she slapped him. It was a hard, vicious slap that echoed in the concrete hallway. The sound made me flinch in my hotel room. Andre stumbled back, holding his cheek, his eyes wide with shock. Keisha got right in his face, her teeth bared like a wolf. "Shut up, you useless coward. Your father is holding out on us. That money belongs to us. It belongs to me for putting up with your family's smell. Now stand guard and shut your mouth." I watched Andre's face change. The fear did not leave, but something else crept in behind it. A realization. He was finally seeing the monster he had married. On the screen, there was a loud metallic snap that sounded like a gunshot. The lock gave way. Kyle dropped the bolt cutters, panting heavily. "Got it," he whispered, wiping his greasy hands on his pants. He grabbed the handle of the roll-up door. I leaned forward in my chair, taking a slow sip of coffee. Showtime. Kyle threw the door upward with a crash. It rattled into its housing, exposing the dark interior of Unit 404. Keisha pushed past him, aiming her flashlight into the gloom, ready to see stacks of cash or gold bars. They rushed in like starving animals attacking a carcass. Keisha was laughing, a high-pitched, manic sound. "We are rich, Kyle. We are finally rich." But the laughter died in her throat within seconds. The flashlight beam swept across the room, illuminating not treasure, but walls of brown cardboard. The room was packed floor to ceiling with boxes. Kyle grabbed the nearest one and ripped it open. He did not find money. He pulled out a handful of tangled copper wire and old circuit boards. He threw it on the floor and grabbed another box. This one was filled with crushed aluminum cans. He began to tear through the room, kicking over stacks of boxes. The contents spilled out onto the concrete floor. Old newspapers from the 90s, broken VCRs, bags of stripped wire, rusty alternator parts. It was exactly what the labels on the boxes said. Recycled materials, 1990 to 2010. Kyle stood in the middle of the mess, holding a broken toaster, his face a mask of pure confusion and rage. "It is trash!" he screamed, throwing the toaster against the wall. "It is just trash. The old man is a hoarder. There is nothing here." Keisha was frantically opening boxes in the back, her fingernails tearing at the tape. "No," she shrieked. "He wrote it in the book. 800,000. It has to be here. Maybe it is under the trash. Dig, Kyle. Dig." She began kicking the piles of wire and metal, her expensive heels slipping on the debris. She looked insane, scrabbling through the refuse she had always claimed to hate. I watched them, feeling a cold satisfaction. They were finally where they belonged. Standing in garbage covered in dust, realizing that their greed had led them to a literal pile of junk. Keisha stood up, her hair messy, her eyes wild. That lying old fraud, she screamed at the ceiling. "He is senile. He is crazy. He tricked us." Kyle was breathing hard, looking around for something to smash. He raised his foot to kick a stack of boxes in the center of the room, but then he stopped. His eyes narrowed. In the middle of the chaos underneath a tarp that Kyle had just partially dislodged, sat a small, clean card table. It was the only organized thing in the room. Kyle ripped the tarp away completely. Sitting on the table was a laptop and a thick red envelope. As if on cue, I tapped the button on my iPad app. In the storage unit, the laptop screen suddenly flared to life, illuminating the dark room with a bright white light. Kyle and Keisha jumped back, startled. On the screen was my face, live from Halifax. I looked calm, rested, and very much awake. I leaned into the camera on my end. "Hello, Kyle." "Hello, Keisha," I said, my voice booming through the Bluetooth speakers I had hidden in the shelving. They both froze, staring at the screen like deer in headlights. Keisha's mouth fell open. Kyle looked around, realizing for the first time that they were being watched. "You should really smile," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "Because you are on camera. And not just this camera. I have been recording everything for the last 10 minutes. And the police, I called them 5 minutes ago. They are pulling into the lot right now." Kyle turned pale, my eyes darting to the open door. Andre was still standing at the threshold, staring at the screen, tears streaming down his face. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his wife, realizing she had destroyed everything for a pile of scrap metal. "Wait," I said, commanding their attention back to the screen. "Before you run, Kyle, open the red envelope. You came for a treasure. I would hate for you to leave empty-handed. Go ahead, open it. It is what you really deserve." Kyle's hand trembled as he reached for the red envelope sitting next to the laptop. He knew he should run, but curiosity is a powerful trap. He tore open the seal. Kyle reached into the red envelope, his hands shaking so badly that he almost dropped the contents. He did not pull out a stack of bearer bonds or a deed to a property. He pulled out a thick stack of printed photographs and a USB drive. I watched on my screen as he stared at the top photo, his face draining of all color, until he looked like a ghost. It was a picture of him and Keisha in my kitchen, taken 3 weeks ago while I was at the hospital. They were not looking for money in the photo. They were kissing. I leaned into the microphone in Halifax, my voice hard as steel. "You thought this storage unit was for hiding money. You were wrong. For 20 years, I have repaired electronics. I built servers from scratch. This unit is not a bank vault. It is a cloud backup center. Every camera I installed in my house, every microphone I hid in the smoke detectors, they all send their data here to the hard drives humming behind those boxes of trash. Keisha snatched the photos from Kyle. She flipped through them frantically. There were transcripts of text messages, copies of loan applications where Kyle had forged Andre's signature, and the most damning piece of all, a transcript of a conversation they had the night before I left for Halifax. I read the words aloud to them through the speakers. Section 4, paragraph 2. Kyle says if the stroke does not kill him, maybe we just double his medication dose. It looks like an accident. Keisha dropped the papers as if they were burning her hands. I continued, my voice rising. I know Kyle is not your brother-in-law. I know he is your ex-boyfriend from Atlanta. I know you have drained Andre's savings account, and now the police know it too. I did not just call them for a burglary. I sent them the digital files from that USB drive an hour ago. They are not coming for thieves. They are coming for attempted murderers and fraudsters. The sound of sirens cut through the air, loud and piercing. It was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The blue and red lights began to flash against the open metal door of the storage unit, illuminating the panic on their faces. Kyle panicked. He looked at the open door, then at the police cruisers screeching to a halt outside. He tried to bolt. He scrambled over a pile of old computer monitors trying to reach the back exit, but he tripped over a box of copper wire. 2 officers were on him before he could stand up. They tackled him into a stack of old newspapers, the dust flying up around them as they cuffed his hands behind his back. Keisha did not run. She froze. When the officers approached her, she immediately started screaming, pointing a trembling finger at Kyle. It was him. He made me do it. I was scared. He threatened me. She was still trying to manipulate, still trying to lie her way out of the consequences, but the officers just turned her around and clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists. Andre stood by the door, watching the scene unfold. He was silent. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had tried so hard to please. She looked back at him, her mascara running down her face, and pleaded, Andre, baby, tell them. Tell them I am a good wife. Help me. Andre walked slowly toward her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding ring. It was a simple gold band, one he had worked extra shifts to afford. He looked at it for a moment, then he looked at the bin next to Keisha's feet. It was a blue recycling bin filled with old, rusty scrap metal. He dropped the ring into the bin. It made a small, insignificant clink as it hit the trash. You belong here, Keisha, he said, his voice steady and deep. Then he turned his back on her and walked out to meet the police, leaving her screaming his name as they dragged her away. 3 months have passed since that night. I sold the house in Chicago. It held too many bad memories, and frankly, it was too big for just 2 men. With the money from the house and the sale of my copper stockpile from the storage unit, I bought a luxury RV. It has a king-sized bed, a full kitchen, and enough room for 2 fishing poles. Andre and I are currently parked near a lake in Montana. He is doing much better. He is working as a pharmacist again, but this time in small towns we visit along the road. He smiles more now than he has in years. We do not talk about Keisha. We do not talk about Kyle, who is currently serving a 10-year sentence for fraud and conspiracy. We talk about the future. I learned a long time ago that people are a lot like the things I used to collect in my truck. Some things look shiny and valuable on the outside, but inside they are rotten and broken. And some things, like a dusty old storage locker or a garbage man with grease under his fingernails, hold more value than you can imagine. Keisha judged the book by its cover, and she paid the price. She thought I was trash, but in the end, she was the one who got taken out to the curb. If you felt a sense of satisfaction watching those handcuffs click shut, please hit the like button on this video. I want to know that I am not the only one who believes in karma. What time is it where you are watching this? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them while I drink my morning coffee. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow I am going to tell you the story about my neighbor who poisoned my dog and how I legally took ownership of his entire backyard. You do not want to miss it.